My only daughter was laughing in my kitchen with her rich in-laws as they measured my walls to throw me, along with my husband, into the basement. My husband was crying in the living room next door, and I felt my whole world just fall apart. And all because they thought I was just some simple old woman, weak and broke. I was just standing there in the hallway of my own home, my carry-on bag still cold from the airplane's overhead bin. I'd just gotten in from Philadelphia, a day ahead of schedule, wanting to surprise David, my husband of 46 years. Instead, I found him on the couch, his shoulders shaking. As I was asking him what was wrong, my daughter's mother-in-law's sharp laugh cut through the air from the kitchen. And what she said next confirmed my worst nightmare. "I'm telling you, Charles," her voice dripped with disdain, "this entire wall has to go. We can knock it out and put a massive Kokata marble island right here." They looked at me like I was a bug, an inconvenience to their grand plans. But for you to understand how things got to this absurd point and why the simple old woman they were about to discard already had their trap set, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Catherine Coleman. I'm 68 years old, a retired architect, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia. And until that moment, my biggest worry was whether David would remember to water my azaleas while I was gone. The flight from Philadelphia had been smooth, and a little wave of excitement had made me catch an earlier flight. I decided not to call. At 68, you don't get many chances to surprise the man you've loved for almost half a century. I pictured David's face, that slow smile that still made my heart ache. I turned the key in the lock, the familiar click echoing in the stillness. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels wrong, heavy. "David," I called out, dropping my carry-on in the entryway. The scent of lemon polish and old coffee hung in the air, just like always. "I'm home, honey." The only answer was a muffled sound from the living room, a choked-back sob. My blood ran cold. I rushed into the room, and all the good cheer of my surprise evaporated like smoke. David was curled up on the sofa, the one we bought together back in 1984, the floral fabric now faded from the sun. His big, strong shoulders were shaking. He was crying, not just silent tears, but deep, painful sobs that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "David, honey, what is it? What's wrong?" He jumped, startled, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. His eyes, usually so full of warmth, were red and puffy. "Catherine, you're not supposed to be home till tomorrow. I caught an earlier flight. What happened? Did someone hurt you?" He shook his head, trying to wipe the tears from his face with the back of his hands. They're here, Catherine. In the kitchen." I froze. As he said it, another sound cut through the heavy silence of the house. Laughter. It was loud, carefree laughter coming from my kitchen. I recognized my daughter's laugh, Tamika's, but she wasn't alone. I heard the sharp, high society laugh of her mother-in-law, Bernice Preston. "Who's here?" I asked, though my stomach already knew the answer, sinking with a leaden weight. "Tamika," David whispered, as if he was afraid to say her name. "And Elijah and his parents. They showed up about an hour ago. They're measuring." Measuring. The word didn't make any sense. Measuring what? Why? I left David on the couch and walked down the hall. The laughter got louder. They were comfortable. They were happy, while my husband cried 20 feet away. I stopped at the doorway of my own kitchen. The scene in front of me felt like a betrayal in Technicolor. Tamika, my daughter, my only child, was holding one end of a metal measuring tape against the wall. Her husband, Elijah, was scribbling notes on a leather-bound notepad, and his parents, Charles and Bernice Preston, were standing by my refrigerator, sipping what looked like my good whiskey from my own glasses. "I'm telling you, Charles," Bernice said, swirling the crystal tumbler. "This entire wall has to go. We can knock it out and put a massive Kokata marble island right here." Charles Preston, a man who always looked like he was smelling something foul, nodded like a connoisseur. "Good bones, but all of this is dated. Look at these cabinets. Oak, it's pathetic." Elijah chuckled. "I know, Dad. It's hideous, but once we get the new stainless steel appliances in, it'll be fabulous, won't it, Tamika?" My daughter, my 39-year-old daughter, just nodded, her eyes shining with a greedy light I'd never seen before. "It's going to be amazing, honey. Absolutely amazing. Tamika. My voice cut through the air like a razor. The effect was instant. Tamika dropped the measuring tape. It clattered on the tile floor with a loud, shrill, metallic sound that echoed in the sudden silence. Mom. Her face drained of color, turning a pale, pasty shade. Mom, what are you doing home? Your flight was tomorrow. I live here, I said, my voice dangerously calm. A better question is, what are you people doing, and why is your father crying in the living room? The Prestons turned to look at me. There was no surprise in their eyes, no shame, just a faint irritation, like I was a maid who had interrupted their dinner party. Oh, Catherine, you're back, Bernice said, taking a delicate sip of my whiskey. Don't be so dramatic. David is just being emotional. We were just planning the renovation. My renovation? I asked, the word sounding foreign in my mouth. Elijah stepped forward. He was a tall, thin man who always dressed in sharp suits, and his personality matched. He put a hand on his hip, a pose of arrogant impatience. Yeah, Mom, we might as well tell you now. Tamika and I are moving in. I looked at Tamika. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was staring at the floor like a child who'd been caught stealing cookies. Moving in? Of course, Elijah said, as if I were slow. Our apartment is lovely, but it's a rental. This house? Well, it's going to be Tamika's anyway. We might as well start making it ours now. It's just practical. Practical. I couldn't speak. I looked at the oak cabinets that Henry, my dad, had helped me install 40 years ago. I looked at the tile David and I had laid ourselves one hot weekend back in '91. Practical. To erase my life. Elijah kept going, oblivious to my anguish. We'll be taking the master bedroom, of course. It has the ensuite bathroom. He gestured vaguely down the hall. You and David can move your things into the guest room in the basement. It's perfectly comfortable. And honestly, at your age, you don't really need all this space, do you? It'll be so much more convenient for everyone. The basement. They were going to move me into my own basement. I felt the blood drain from my face. I designed this house. I drew the blueprints myself. I hammered nails alongside the construction crew with the sun beating down on my back. This wasn't just a house. It was my life's work, and they were talking about it like it was a piece of furniture they could just move out of the way. Out. The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of 40 years of memories. Elijah actually laughed, a short, disbelieving bark. Excuse me, what did you say? I said, I repeated, louder this time, the anger starting to simmer under the surface. Get out of my house. Charles Preston, who'd been silent until now, stepped forward. He was a man used to authority, a man who ran a hedge fund and looked down on everyone else like insects under his microscope. Now look here, Catherine, let's not be childish. We're family, and we're discussing a practical solution to your situation. My situation? Your age, Bernice cut in, setting her glass down with a click. Your limited income. Tamika's been very open with us about your finances. We know how much she has to help you two out every month. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Tamika? Helped me? I've never taken a dime from my daughter, not one. We think it's admirable, Bernice went on, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. But it's a burden, and now that she's married to Elijah, we're her family too. We've decided to take on that burden. We'll take over this house, we'll handle the bills, we'll handle the upkeep. And in return, Charles added, you and David will have a secure place to live downstairs. It's more than fair. I turned to my daughter. She was still staring at the floor. Her silence was her confession. Tamika, she flinched. Look at me. Slowly, her eyes met mine. They were filled with shame, guilt, and something ugly. Weakness. Your father is crying, I said, my voice trembling with an anger so deep it scared me. These people I never invited into my home are drinking my liquor and carving up my house like spoils of war. Tell them to leave. Tell them, Tamika. Now. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment my daughter would stand up and be the woman I raised her to be. The moment she would choose. Tamika looked at me. She looked at Elijah. She looked at his rich, powerful parents. And then she caved. Broke right in front of me. Mom, just listen, she pleaded, her voice a whine. Just stop making a scene. You're embarrassing me. Embarrassing me. The word hit me like a slap. They're right, Mom, she said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. This house is too much for you. We can help. You're not getting any younger. We worry about you and Dad all the time. This is the best way. The best way? I whispered. To kick me out of my own bedroom? Mom, stop! She finally yelled, her face turning red. Just stop. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of worrying about this old house. Tired of worrying about your bills. Tired of pretending we're not all just waiting. This is my house now, or it will be. Elijah and I are making the decisions. Just accept it. And just like that, the rage was gone. Not faded, vanished. It was replaced by a cold, clear silence in my head. The world became sharper. I saw my daughter, not as the little girl I raised, but as a 39-year-old stranger, a parasite who had just confirmed my deepest, darkest fears. I saw her husband, Elijah, smirking, a smug look of victory on his face. I saw his parents looking at me with the distant pity of zookeepers observing an old lioness. The daughter I knew was gone. I see, I said. My voice was perfectly steady. I nodded slowly. I turned my back on them. I walked out of the kitchen, past my daughter, who looked confused by my lack of yelling. I walked back to the living room. David was still on the couch, looking at me with terrified, hopeful eyes. Catherine, what's happening? I didn't stop. I went to the coat closet. I took out his winter coat. I walked back to him and held it open. Get your coat, David. What? He sniffled. Catherine, what are you doing? We're leaving, I said. My voice was calm. It was the calm of a general who's just seen the whole battlefield and knows exactly where to strike. Tamika and the others had followed me into the room. What are you talking about, Mom? Tamika asked, her voice a mix of confusion and irritation. Where are you going? You can't just leave. I helped David to his feet, guiding his arms into the sleeves of his coat. He looked at me, his eyes asking 1,000 questions, but he trusted me. He always had. I picked up his small wallet from the table. I turned to face my daughter. I looked at her husband, at his parents. You said you were taking over, I said. You said you were making the decisions now. I walked towards the front door. So take over, I said, pulling the door open. It's all yours. I guided David out onto the porch, into the cool night air, and I pulled the door shut behind us. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a lifetime ending and a new one beginning. I didn't call a cab. I used the private car service I keep on my phone. A sleek, black, flawless Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the curb in under 2 minutes. David was shivering beside me. Whether it was from the cold night air or the shock, I couldn't tell. He looked at the expensive car, then at me, his eyes wide with confusion. Catherine, what are we doing? Where are we going? We're going somewhere safe, David. Get in. The driver held the door for him. I gave the address. The Ritz-Carlton downtown. David didn't say a single word the entire ride. He just stared out the window, his reflection showing the tear tracks glistening on his cheeks. When we pulled up under the hotel's bright, elegant portico, he tensed up. Catherine, we can't, he whispered, his voice trembling. This place must cost $600 a night. We don't have that kind of money. It's all right, honey, I said, taking his hand. I led us to the front desk. The night manager looked up, and his professional smile immediately became one of genuine recognition. Mrs. Coleman, a pleasure, ma'am. We weren't expecting you. It was a last-minute decision, Michael, I said. I need the presidential suite immediately. Of course, ma'am. Right this way. We'll have your bags sent up. David grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my coat. Presidential suite? He whispered, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. Catherine, what are you doing? I just squeezed his hand. Let's get upstairs first, then I promise, we'll talk. The suite was breathtaking. It was bigger than the entire first floor of our house. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the living room, showing the entire city sparkling below us like a carpet of diamonds. David walked into the center of the room and just stood there. He touched the smooth marble of a side table as if he wasn't sure it was real. Catherine, he said, his voice trembling badly now. I'm scared. What's going on? How do How do they know you here? I took off my coat and laid it carefully on a chair. I sat him down on a soft velvet sofa that probably cost more than our old car. David, I need you to just listen for a moment. I have to make a phone call. It's the most important phone call of our lives. I pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. The anger from the house had burned away all the shaking, leaving only cold, hard steel. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't called in almost a year. It rang twice in Chicago. James Patterson speaking. James, it's Catherine Coleman. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Catherine? It's 3 a.m. here. It must be... Is it... It's time, James, I said. A heavy silence stretched across the line. Are you absolutely sure? James's voice was all business now. You know what this means. Clause 7B is the nuclear button. It can't be undone. It means Tamika is... I'm sure, I said, my voice flat. She just tried, with her husband and his parents, to move my husband and me into our own basement. She made her choice. Activate it immediately. I want her cut off by morning. Consider it done, James said. I'll need you and David in my office as soon as possible. 9 a.m. My team will get everything ready. We'll be there, I said and hung up. David was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. Clause 7B, cut who off? Catherine, you're scaring me. Who is James? I sat down across from him. I'd kept this secret for 40 years to protect him. Now I saw that by protecting him, I had left him defenseless. I owed him the truth. I'd owed it to him for decades. James Patterson, I began, is my lawyer, my real lawyer, not the local guy we use for our taxes. James is the head of my estate. Your estate? David, I said, taking his cold hands in mine. I haven't been completely honest with you or with Tamika, for a very, very long time. I told him everything. I told him about my architecture firm. How when I retired at 54, I didn't just retire. I sold the firm. More accurately, I sold my portfolio of structural design patents to an international conglomerate. I didn't just make enough to live on, David. I confessed the old lie, the taste of ash in my mouth. I made a lot, more than I ever knew what to do with. How much, Catherine? He whispered. The initial sale was for $25 million. After taxes, I put $21 million into a blind trust. I called it the Coleman Family Trust. David let out a small, strangled sound. 21 million? It's grown since then, honey. James manages it. It's closer to 36 million now. But why? He cried, pulling his hands away. It was a cry of betrayal, not joy. Why would you hide this? Our life, the budgeting, the old car. Tamika, why? Because of Tamika, I said, the sadness of it all finally hitting me. I saw what money did to my partner's kids. It made them soft. It made them entitled. It made them weak. I didn't want that for our girl. I wanted her to work. I wanted her to learn the value of $1. I wanted her to be a woman, not an heiress. So you played poor. I lived simply, I corrected him gently. I gave her everything she needed. Her college was paid for by the trust. Her down payment on her first apartment. It was the trust. I always told her it was the last of my savings. I really thought I was teaching her responsibility. I got up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. But I was wrong. I wasn't teaching her responsibility. I was just hiding the target. I made her believe I was weak. I made her believe I was simple. I made her believe I was a burden. And she believed it. David was silent, trying to process 20 years of lies, trying to reconcile the woman he married with the stranger sitting in this palace of a hotel room. So the house, he finally asked, his voice small. The house they were measuring. The house they're trying to take. I turned to face him. That's the most important part, David. The house isn't ours. It never was. What do you mean? I said, feeling the first cold spark of justice. It belongs to the trust. We're just its lifetime tenants. And Tamika, she just tried to evict the landlord. The next morning, David and I arrived at James Patterson's office. David was still in the clothes from the night before, his eyes red and puffy. I, on the other hand, had called the hotel concierge at 6 a.m. and had a new $2,000 charcoal gray suit delivered to my room. When I walked out of the room dressed, David gasped. He'd never seen me in anything that wasn't from a department store. He was finally, after 46 years, starting to see the woman he married. James's office wasn't some small, dusty law practice. It was on the 44th floor of the SunTrust Plaza, a sprawling space of dark wood, glass, and expensive abstract art. The receptionist didn't even ask our names. She simply stood as we entered. "Mrs. Coleman, Mr. Patterson is waiting for you in the main conference room." David squeezed my hand. This was a world he never knew I belonged to. We walked into a room with a 20-foot mahogany table. James stood at the far end, overlooking the entire city. He wasn't just the friendly voice on the phone. Dressed in a sharp pinstripe suit, he radiated an aura of absolute power. "Good morning, Catherine," David, James said, gesturing to the chairs. "I apologize for the circumstances, but I'm glad you're finally here. We have a lot to get through and very little time." "James, what's going on?" David asked, his voice low. "Catherine told me about the trust. But why would Tamika act that way? It's not just the house, is it?" "No, David, it isn't," James said grimly. He slid a thick, spiral-bound report across the table to me. "I took the liberty of activating my investigators the moment Catherine mentioned the possibility of activating Clause 7B. What you saw last night wasn't just disrespect. It was desperation, pure and simple." I opened the report. The first page was a summary of my daughter's finances. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Oh my God," I whispered. "What is it, Catherine?" David asked, leaning over. I couldn't speak. I just turned the report so he could see the final number at the bottom of the page. "What? What's $760,000? He asked. "That," James said, "is the amount of debt your daughter Tamika and her husband Elijah are currently in." "But that's impossible," David protested. "Tamika has a wonderful job. She's a marketing director. She makes good money. She told us she makes $160,000 a year," James cut in, "which is a respectable salary. The problem is, her husband Elijah spends $310,000 a year." He clicked a remote. The large screen on the wall lit up. It was a spreadsheet, credit card statements, Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue, a lease payment for a new Maserati Elijah was driving, mortgage payments on a condo they couldn't afford. "They're living a lie, David," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "A complete, suffocating lie." "But the Prestons," David said. "Elijah's parents, they're rich. Surely they're helping." "That's the worst part," James said, clicking to the next slide. "The Prestons are rich, yes, but they're also frugal with their own money. They believe in appearances, but not in handouts. They expect Tamika, as the wife, to provide that lifestyle. Tamika, in her attempt to keep up with their expectations, has been drowning. She's taken out personal loans. She's maxed out 23 different credit cards. She is, to be blunt, about to lose everything." I stared at the numbers, at the trips to Aspen, the jewelry purchases. "That's why they were measuring my kitchen," I said. "They need the money from my house. They need it now." "It's worse than that, Catherine," James said. His voice dropped, and the room suddenly felt colder. "What they did yesterday, that wasn't Plan A. That was Plan B." "Plan A?" David whispered. James looked at me. "Catherine, I didn't want to tell you this unless it became necessary. But 3 months ago, I got a call from the executive manager of the bank that runs the Coleman Trust." He clicked to a new document. It was a scanned copy of an email. 3 months ago, Tamika Coleman and her father-in-law, Charles Preston, scheduled a private meeting with the bank. They brought an attorney of their own. They petitioned the bank to have control of the trust's assets, frozen. I shot up from my chair. "They did what?" "They tried to have you, Catherine, legally declared mentally incompetent." David let out a small, horrified gasp. "They presented a file," James continued, "full of anecdotal evidence. How you forget things, how you live below your means, which they cited as a sign of senile hoarding, how you refuse to manage your own finances, letting them fall into disarray. But we live simply," David protested. "That was our choice." "It was a choice they tried to use as a weapon against you," James said. They argued that Catherine's refusal to live a life of luxury was proof she was no longer of sound mind. They wanted the bank to grant Tamika emergency power of attorney over the trust to protect the assets from her mother. They wanted the $36 million, I stated, the ice in my veins spreading. They wanted it all, James confirmed. And the bank, of course, laughed them out of the room. The trust is ironclad. It's designed to prevent exactly this. The bank manager knows you personally, Catherine. He knew it was a fraudulent claim, and as per the trust's security protocol, he called me immediately. I sat back down, the weight of the betrayal crushing me. This wasn't just a greedy daughter wanting a bigger house. This was a cold, calculated, premeditated conspiracy. My daughter had tried to have me committed, to have my mind legally erased so she could steal her inheritance. So yesterday, David said, connecting the final piece. Yesterday was Plan B. I finished for him. When they couldn't get the trust, they decided to go after the one asset they thought I actually owned, the house. They couldn't get the millions, so they settled for the $500,000 they thought the house was worth. They weren't just moving us to the basement, Catherine, David said, his voice now hard as steel. They were moving us out of our lives one way or another. I looked at James. So, she did it. She triggered Clause 7B. James Patterson smiled. She triggered it the moment she walked into that bank 3 months ago. Catherine, Tamika is already disinherited. She just doesn't know it yet. David's hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. It was rage. A pure, cold rage I had never seen in him. They tried to have you committed, he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. They tried to lock you away. They tried, I said, and they failed. So they came for the house. Those vultures, he hissed. Catherine, what does this mean? What happens now? I looked at James. Tell him exactly what Tamika just did to herself. James steepled his fingers, looking at David with a calm, professional respect. David, when Catherine and I set up this trust, she was worried about this exact scenario. She was worried that Tamika, surrounded by the wrong influences, might one day see her as a piggy bank instead of a mother. So Catherine had me write a very specific punitive clause. We call it Clause 7B. What does it do? David asked. We nicknamed it the Wolf in Sheep's Clothing Clause, James said. It states that if any primary beneficiary, in this case Tamika Coleman, is found guilty of any act of intentional financial, emotional, or physical harm against the founders Catherine and David Coleman, that beneficiary is immediately and permanently disinherited. David's eyes widened. Permanently? Permanently. Irrevocably. As if she was never named in the trust, James confirmed. The attempt to have Catherine declared mentally incompetent, an act of profound financial and emotional harm, triggered this clause 3 months ago. And yesterday, he added, their hostile attempt to take your home and banish you to the basement was the final undeniable nail in her coffin. As of this moment, Tamika Coleman has no legal claim to a single penny of the $36 million Coleman Family Trust. The words hung in the air. $36 million gone. David processed it. So what happens to the money? To the house? Where does it all go? It goes, James said, to the contingent beneficiary, the person Catherine designated to inherit everything in the event of Tamika's disqualification. I smiled. Anthony, David said, surprised. Your sister's son. My sister's son, I affirmed. The one who works as a high school physics teacher in Chicago. The one who calls us every Sunday just to check in. The one who still sends you a handmade card on your birthday, David. James nodded. I called Anthony this morning. I explained the situation. He was shocked, to say the least, but he understands. He's flying in tonight. As of this moment, your nephew is the legal heir to the entire estate, including the house at 125 Peachtree Lane. A heavy silence fell as we absorbed the magnitude of the shift. Then, a slow, cold smile spread across my face. She doesn't know, I whispered. No, James said. She has no idea. She just thinks she's dealing with a tired old woman who lives in a house she can steal. They want the house, I said, a plan forming in my mind. They're so desperate for that $500,000. They're willing to destroy our lives for it. So, I said, looking at James, we're going to give it to them. David looked at me. Catherine, what are you talking about? The trap, David. They set their trap. Now we spring ours. James understood immediately. His eyes lit up. Oh, this is brilliant, Catherine. Diabolical and perfectly legal. What are you two planning? David asked, his voice a mix of fear and excitement. James leaned forward. Your family, David, thinks you're weak, old, and senile. They think they've won. They think Catherine ran away last night like a scared dog. They're arrogant, greedy, and stupid. We're going to use that arrogance against them. We'll draft a new document, I added, a property transfer and care agreement. It'll look official. It'll say that we, Catherine and David Coleman, in our frail state, agree to sign over the deed to the house. In exchange, James continued, for Tamika and Elijah taking on all responsibility for our care. They won't be able to sign it fast enough. But the fine print, David, I said. The fine print will be a work of art. What's it going to say? It's going to say, James smiled, that they, Tamika and Elijah Coleman, along with their witnesses Charles and Bernice Preston, hereby acknowledge and confirm that Catherine and David Coleman are in a vulnerable state, suffering from diminished capacity, and are unable to make their own financial and personal decisions. It will state that they are voluntarily and knowingly assuming control of all assets for this reason. It's not a transfer. It's a confession, I said. A signed, witnessed, and notarized confession of conspiracy and elder abuse. My heart was pounding now, not with fear, but with a cold, righteous fury. It's perfect. They'll be so blinded by the prize they'll sign their own death warrant. Let's do it, David said, his voice firm. I picked up my phone. My hand was steady. I dialed Tamika's number. She answered on the first ring. She must have been staring at it, panicking. Mom, where are you? Is Dad okay? We've been so worried. Her voice was a perfect imitation of a concerned daughter. It made me sick. I let out a long, tired sigh. I made my voice shake. Tamika, honey, Mom, what's wrong? Your father and I are at a lawyer's office, I said, playing the part of a broken, defeated woman. We've been talking all night and maybe you're right, honey. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Silence. What do you mean, Mom? She asked, her voice cautious, not daring to hope. We're old, I said, letting my voice crack. David's a wreck. I can't fight this anymore. You said you'd take care of us. You said you'd handle everything. The house. It's too much. Oh, Mom, she sighed. The relief in her voice was disgusting. Yes, of course, we'll take care of everything. You're doing the right thing, I promise. Good, I said. Then I need you to come to the lawyer's office, James Patterson, at the SunTrust Plaza. I want to sign the house over to you officially. Let's just get this over with. There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, greed overriding any small trace of caution. You're serious, she whispered. You'll sign the house over today? Yes, I said. At 3 p.m. Bring Elijah and his parents. They seem to be in on this. I want everyone here as witnesses, so it's all legal. Yes, Mom, absolutely. Her voice was bright, triumphant. We'll be there at 3. Don't worry about a thing. We'll take care of you from now on. I know you will, honey, I said. I know you will. I hung up the phone. I looked at David, his face pale but resolute. I looked at James, who was already dictating the terms of the agreement to his assistant. She took the bait, I said. James smiled. The trap is set. At 3 p.m. on the dot, the heavy glass doors to the conference room swung open. My daughter, Tamika, and her husband, Elijah, walked in first. They were followed closely by his parents, Charles and Bernice Preston. They weren't the same people from the night before. They had gone home, showered, and dressed for what they clearly believed was their coronation day. Tamika wore her most expensive power suit, a navy blue number I'm sure was bought on credit. Elijah was in a brilliant white pantsuit, looking like a triumphant CEO about to close a big deal. Bernice Preston was draped in gold jewelry, her smile sharp and predatory. Charles just looked smug, like he had personally orchestrated this entire victory. Mom, Tamika said, coming over and placing a hand on my shoulder. Her hand felt heavy, possessive. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable. This is for the best for everyone." Elijah glided over to David. "Father David," he said, his voice dripping with fake honey. "You look so tired, you poor thing. Don't you worry. From now on, we'll handle everything. You won't have to lift a finger. You won't regret this." "Let's just get on with it," Charles Preston announced, pulling out a chair at the head of the table as if he owned the place. "We have celebratory dinner reservations at 7. James Patterson, ever the professional, gestured for them to sit. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice." As Mrs. Coleman expressed to her daughter, she and Mr. Coleman had a long night of discussion and have come to a significant decision. He slid 4 thick, professionally bound documents across the polished mahogany table. "This," James said, "is the care and property transfer agreement. It's a comprehensive document." Elijah's eyes were practically glued to the cover. He was vibrating with impatience. "Let me summarize the key points," James continued, his voice a calm, legal drone. "The agreement states that Mr. and Mrs. Catherine Coleman, the founders, agree to transfer the full deed and title of the property at 125 Peachtree Lane to Mr. and Mrs. Tamika Coleman." Elijah let out a small, sharp gasp of relief. "In exchange," James went on, "Mr. and Mrs. Tamika Coleman agree to provide comprehensive lifetime care for the founders. This includes, but is not limited to, housing, medical oversight, and all financial management." "Yes, absolutely, we agree," Elijah said, grabbing the pen in the center of the table. 100%. Where do we sign?" James held up a hand. "Patience, Mr. Coleman. We must do this by the book. There are several signature pages." He turned to Charles and Bernice. "And as you, Mr. and Mrs. Preston, were present during the initial family discussion last night and are here today, we'd be grateful if you'd sign as official witnesses to this agreement." "Witnesses?" "Of course," Charles said, puffing out his chest. "Excellent," James said. "Your signatures will be on page 8. It's just a standard witness statement. It verifies that you are present, that you are party to this agreement, and that you can attest to the state of mind of the founders." "Their state of mind?" Bernice asked, her smile twitching. "Yes," James said smoothly, flipping through the pages. "Right here by signing, you attest that you have personally observed and agree that Catherine and David Coleman are now in a state that requires dedicated oversight and are making this decision based on their acknowledged inability to manage their own affairs." Charles and Bernice looked at each other and smirked. They thought this was brilliant. They thought this legally cemented their argument that we were senile. "Of course," Charles said, nodding. "We're happy to attest to that. We've been saying it for months. They clearly need oversight." "Wonderful," James said. "Then please, let's begin." He passed the first copy to Elijah. He didn't even open it. He flipped straight to the last page and signed his name with a flourish. Tamika followed, her signature messier, more nervous, but just as quick. They didn't read a single word. They didn't read the clauses confirming their acknowledgement of our diminished capacity. They didn't read the fine print detailing their willingness to take control. They just signed. Then James passed the next 2 copies to Charles and Bernice. They also flipped to page 8 and proudly signed their names as witnesses, legally attesting to our incompetence. Finally, James slid the last copy to me and David. I looked at David. His hand was steady. He took the heavy, expensive pen. He signed his name. Then I signed mine. James gathered all 4 copies, stacking them neatly. "Well," he said, tapping them on the table, "that appears to be everything." Elijah stood up, beaming. He clapped his hands once. "Perfect. Well, that's that. Tamika, honey, we need to call the contractors. They can start on the master bedroom tomorrow." He turned to me. "Mom, Dad, we'll help you start packing your things for the basement as soon as we get home. It'll be much cozier for you down there." Tamika looked relieved, like the weight of the world, or at least $760,000 of it, had been lifted from her shoulders. I let the silence hang for a moment. I watched them bask in their victory. I saw the greed, the relief, the pure, unadulterated arrogance. I let them enjoy it for 10 full seconds. Then I looked at James. He nodded. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and strong, cutting through Elijah's happy chatter, "we're not quite done yet." Elijah's smile faltered. "What? What do you mean?" "We signed everything." "You did," I agreed. "But there's just one tiny logistical problem with the document you just signed." A minor detail, really. Charles Preston narrowed his eyes. What detail? I leaned forward. The house. I don't actually own it. Elijah's triumphant, beaming face was a picture of pure greed. Charles Preston looked smug. He felt he had just successfully brokered the deal of a lifetime, securing his son's future by helping to dispose of his inconvenient in-laws. Actually, Mrs. Coleman, we're not quite done yet, James said. His voice had changed. The friendly, compliant tone was gone. In its place was a sharp, cold precision. The voice of a lawyer who was no longer negotiating, but dictating. Elijah, who was already turning for the door, paused. What do you mean? We signed the papers. It's done. I mean, James said, there's a slight technical problem with the care and property transfer agreement you just signed. Charles Preston let out an impatient, condescending sigh. What problem? It's a standard transfer agreement. I'm a lawyer myself, Patterson, or at least I was. I know how these things work. Do you? James asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, Charles said dismissively. We checked the county records before we even came here. The property at 125 Peachtree Lane is registered in Catherine Coleman's name. She just signed over her rights. It's over. Let's go. James Patterson smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a hunter who has just watched the wolf walk straight into a steel trap. That's where you are fundamentally mistaken, Mr. Preston. You checked the public records, but you didn't check, or rather, you couldn't check, the private trust records. You see, Mrs. Coleman's name is indeed on that deed, but it is listed only as Catherine Coleman, trustee. The air in the room crackled. Tamika, who had looked relieved, now looked confused. What? What are you talking about? What trust? The legal and undisputed owner of that property, James continued, and has been for the last 20 years, is the Coleman Family Trust. What? Elijah's voice was a high-pitched squeak. The Coleman Family Trust, I said, speaking for the first time since they walked in. My trust. The one I established in 2004, right after I sold my company. Tamika stared at me, her face a mask of total confusion. You have a trust? What? Like a little retirement bank account? No, honey, I said, leaning forward. Not like a little bank account, like all the bank accounts. Bernice Preston let out a short, ugly laugh. A trust. Don't be ridiculous. You live in that sad little house. You drive that 10-year-old car. You're just a retired architect. What could you possibly have in a trust? A few thousand. This is a pathetic waste of time. I looked at Bernice. I let her arrogance, her complete and total misjudgment of me, hang in the air. I let her feel superior for one last glorious second. James, I asked, my voice calm, what is the current valuation of the Coleman Family Trust? James looked at a different folder, a thick one they hadn't seen before. As of market open this morning, Mrs. Coleman, the trust's liquid and fixed assets are valued at $36,421,000 and some change. The silence that followed was so profound, I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. I could hear David let out a shaky breath beside me. He knew, but hearing the number said aloud in that room was still a shock. Tamika just stared at me. Her mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. Charles Preston's smug, fleshy face just collapsed. He looked like he'd been physically hit. 30 million. But the most beautiful reaction, the one I will cherish, was Elijah's. His face went through a rapid series of emotions. First complete confusion, then utter disbelief, then a wild, ecstatic, all-consuming joy. His eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. 36 million, he whispered, turning to Tamika, his voice trembling. Honey, we're rich. He actually started to laugh, a high, hysterical sound that was half sob. She has 36 million. Oh my God, Tamika, we're rich. He lunged at Tamika, who was still frozen, throwing his arms around her neck. We're rich. We don't need the stupid house. Who cares about the house? We get the trust. He pulled away from her and turned to me, his attitude shifting in an instant. The fake honey was gone, replaced by a frantic, desperate, fawning adoration. Mom. Oh, Mom. I mean, Catherine, honest to God, I knew it. I always knew you were special. I always told Tamika, Your mother is such a dignified woman, so wise. Stop. My voice was cold. It cut through his hysterical rambling and stopped him mid-sentence. What? He asked, his smile faltering. You're not rich, I said. She's not rich. You get nothing. He froze. What? What do you mean? Tamika, she's your daughter. She's the beneficiary. She was, I said. But the agreement? Elijah stammered, pointing frantically at the documents on the table. We signed. We have an agreement. Oh, yes, James Patterson said, picking up the stack of papers they had so eagerly signed. He held them up. The care and property transfer agreement. Thank you for this. It's an incredibly valuable document. Elijah looked at his father, confused. See? It's valuable. Oh, it is, James agreed. But not as a property transfer. As I said, that part is completely null, since Catherine doesn't own the house she was transferring to you. No, this document is valuable. As a confession. Charles Preston's face went from pale to a sickly gray. He finally understood. A confession, Tamika whispered. Yes, I said, looking directly at my daughter. You, your husband, and your in-laws have just signed a legally binding document, attested by witnesses, declaring that you all believe I am mentally incompetent, and that you are conspiring to take control of my assets based on this belief. You have just handed me all the proof I will ever need for a court of law. Tamika stared at the papers, then at me, and then at James. The color was draining from her face, only to be replaced by a dark, ugly flush of anger. So what? She suddenly screamed, slamming her palm on the mahogany table. The sound made Elijah jump and David flinch. So what? It's a stupid piece of paper. It's a trick. It doesn't mean anything. She turned her wild eyes on me, her voice getting louder, cracking with panic. You can't do this. I'm your daughter. I'm your only daughter. I'm the beneficiary. That trust, that $36 million, it's mine. You can't just take it away from me. She can't. Right, Charles, tell them. She was looking at me, but she was pleading with her husband, her in-laws, trying to reassure them, trying to reassure herself. It's my birthright. You were the beneficiary, Tamika, I said. My voice was quiet. The calm in the room seemed to terrify her more than any yelling could. You were the beneficiary until 10:15 a.m. on Tuesday, August 12th, 3 months ago. Tamika froze. I don't know what you're talking about. You don't? I asked. August 12th, a meeting at the First National Trust Bank. You, your father-in-law, Charles here, and some lawyer from his firm. Does that ring a bell? You would have thought she'd been shot. Her face went slack. How did you know about that? The bank? They said it was a confidential inquiry. They called me. James Patterson cut in, his voice like ice. The moment you left the building. As the trustee of the Coleman Trust, I am legally bound to investigate any hostile inquiries or attempts to take control of the assets. Hostile inquiries? Tamika stammered, looking for a defense. I was just asking questions. I was worried about her state. You weren't asking questions, Tamika, I said, finally getting to my feet. I felt tall. I felt powerful. You were making accusations. You told the board members I was senile. You told them I was a hoarder. You claimed my simple private lifestyle was proof of advanced mental decay and a danger to myself and the estate. You brought a lawyer and you petitioned the board to have me declared mentally incompetent and for you to be granted emergency power of attorney over all $36 million. That, James said, was a profound tactical error, because that one singular act of deep intentional betrayal triggered Clause 7B. Clause 7B, Elijah whispered, his face pale. What is Clause 7B? That, I said, is the part of the trust I prayed to God I'd never have to use. I walked around the table until I was standing right in front of my daughter. She was trembling. When I created this trust, I knew your heart, Tamika. I knew it was good, but I also knew your weakness. I knew you were easily swayed. I knew you wanted desperately to be liked by people like them. I gestured to the Prestons, people who only value the cost of things. So I had James build a defense mechanism into the very heart of the trust. A fail-safe, a poison pill, We call it the wolf in sheep's clothing clause. David, who had been silent, spoke his first word since they walked in. His voice was cold. Explain. It states, I said, looking directly into Tamika's terrified eyes, in very simple, ironclad legal terms, that if the primary beneficiary, Tamika Coleman, or anyone acting in concert with her, like her husband or his parents, is found guilty of committing intentional financial, emotional, or physical harm against me or your father, that beneficiary is immediately, automatically, and permanently disinherited as if she was never named in the first place. Permanent, David echoed. It was a judgment. The moment you sat in that bank and tried to have me erased from my own life, Tamika, I said, you erased yourself from my legacy. You get nothing, not the house, not the savings, not a single penny of the trust. Not now, not ever. The words settled in the room like dust. Charles Preston was the first to react, sputtering, his legal mind searching for a loophole. This is outrageous. It's duress. It's a contract of adhesion. It won't hold up in court. We'll fight this. James Patterson actually laughed, a dry, cold sound. Fight it with what, Mr. Preston? It's already held up. The trust was vetted against this exact challenge by 2 federal courts when it was drafted. It's ironclad. Your client disqualified herself 3 months ago with her own actions. James held up the stack of papers they had just signed. And to make matters worse, she and all of you just signed a full notarized confession admitting to the very acts that disqualify her. The game is over, Charles. You lost. And that's when it hit Elijah. The house was nothing. The $36 million, the fantasy, the whole reason he was in that room, the entire basis of his marriage, it was all gone. It had never been his. He looked at Tamika, his face a mask of pure, reptilian hatred. You idiot, he hissed at her. You failed. And then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, sliding ungracefully from his expensive chair onto the Persian rug in a dead faint. Elijah was still on the floor, propped up on one elbow. His expensive white pantsuit was smudged with dust from the rug. Charles and Bernice Preston were frozen in their chairs, their faces a sickly shade of gray, looking like statues in a museum of their own arrogance. Tamika, my daughter, was the only one moving. She was shaking her head over and over, as if she could physically deny the words she'd just heard. She ignored her fainted husband. She ignored her stunned in-laws. She just looked at me, her eyes wide with a desperate childlike panic. No, she whispered. No. If not me, then who? Her voice cracked. Who gets it? Who gets the house? Who gets everything? It doesn't just go away, does it? She looked around the room as if the $36 million was a physical object, a trophy she'd been promised, and she was terrified it had just vanished. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply turned my head and nodded at James. James, I believe our other guest is waiting. Please have him join us. James pressed a small button on the conference room intercom. You can come in now, Anthony. The side door, the one that led to James's private office, swung open. A young man walked in. He was in his early 30s, wearing a simple teacher's suit. His hair was neatly combed, and his face was kind, but marked by a deep sadness. It was my nephew Anthony, my sister's son. Tamika's head snapped toward him, her confusion instantly turning into a new, raw, burning anger. Anthony, what the hell are you doing here? This is a private family meeting. Get out. On the floor, Elijah managed to sit up. His hair was a mess, and his makeup was starting to run. He saw Anthony, and his face twisted in contempt. The school teacher. What's he doing here? Did he come to check our blood pressure? Get him out of here. Anthony stopped a few feet from the table. He looked at Tamika, not with anger, but with a deep, steady pity. Hello, Tamika? I'm here because Aunt Catherine and Uncle David asked me to be. He's here, James Patterson said, his voice cutting through the tension. As the contingent beneficiary of the Coleman Family Trust. Tamika just stared. What? As of 9 a.m. this morning, James continued, upon your legal and permanent disqualification under Clause 7B, the status of primary beneficiary was dissolved. As per the trust's bylaws, All assets, rights, and titles revert immediately and without appeal to the contingent beneficiary. In this case, Mr. Anthony Johnson. James looked at Anthony and nodded. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Anthony is the sole heir to the entire $36 million estate. The silence in the room was absolute. Elijah, still on the floor, made a small choking sound. Charles Preston looked like he was having a heart attack. Tamika just shook her head, a wild, broken laugh escaping her lips. Him? You're giving it all to him? A public school physics teacher from Chicago. This is a joke. This is the sickest joke I've ever heard. It's not a joke, Tamika, Anthony said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. He stepped forward and placed a single, crisp legal document on the table, directly in front of her. It landed with a soft, final thud. What is this? Tamika whispered, afraid to touch it. As the new legal trustee of the trust, Anthony said, which, as you now know, is the sole owner of the property at 125 Peachtree Lane. This is a formal, legal notice of eviction. Elijah scrambled to his feet, his white suit now wrinkled and pathetic. Eviction? You can't evict us. That's our house. No, Elijah, Anthony said, looking him straight in the eye for the first time. It's my house now. Or rather, it belongs to the trust that I manage on behalf of my aunt and uncle. You and Tamika were living there as guests. Last night, you tried to evict the rightful tenants and move them to the basement. You are no longer guests. He tapped the paper. This notice gives you and your wife, Tamika Coleman, exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. 24 hours! Tamika exploded, finding her voice. That's insane. We have things there. Our furniture, our lives are in that house. You have 24 hours to remove your movable personal belongings, Anthony stated, his voice like steel. Anything left on the property after 3 p.m. tomorrow, including your husband's plans for his marble island and your father-in-law's measuring tape, will be considered abandoned property. It will be immediately liquidated and the profits donated to a charity for the elderly. The locks on all the doors will be changed at 3:01 p.m. tomorrow. You bitch! Elijah shrieked, and he actually lunged across the table. I wouldn't do that, Mr. Coleman, James said calmly, stepping directly into his path without even flinching. You're already facing possible criminal charges for conspiracy to commit elder fraud. Adding assault to that list would be, and I use the legal term here, exceptionally stupid. Elijah stopped, his hand raised, his face a mask of ugly, impotent rage. As of this moment, Anthony said, you are all trespassing in this office, and if you set foot on the property at 125 Peachtree Lane again, without my express written permission, or that of my aunt and uncle, I will have you arrested. Tamika ignored him. She ignored everyone. She stumbled past James, past the table, until she was standing right in front of me. Her face was a wreck of tears, snot, and sweat. Him, she choked out, pointing a finger toward Anthony. Instead of me, him. Why, Mom? I'm your daughter. I'm your blood. He's just your sister's son. I looked at my daughter. My heart was heavy, no longer with anger, but with a vast, empty sadness. You're right, Tamika, I said. You are my blood. But he, I turned and gestured to Anthony, who was now standing beside David, holding his hand. He is my family. He's the one who calls David every Sunday just to talk. He's the one who remembers my birthday, not with a text, but with a handwritten card. He's the one who, when David had his knee surgery 2 years ago, flew in on his own dime and sat by his hospital bed for 3 days, sleeping in a chair, without asking for a single thing in return. You are my daughter, Tamika, but he is my family. I looked into her eyes. You're nothing but a disappointment. Charles Preston. His face, a mask of purple fury, finally understood that the game was over. He was a man who hated to lose, and he had just been checkmated in front of his entire family. He grabbed his wife, Bernice, by the arm, pulling her roughly to her feet. This is preposterous, he sputtered, straightening his suit jacket. A complete farce. We will not stand here to be insulted by this schoolteacher and some senile old woman who thinks she's a queen. He's right. Bernice chimed in frantically, brushing imaginary dust from her expensive silk blouse. "We're leaving. Tamika, Elijah, get your things. We don't need this charity. We have our own money. We certainly don't need her 36 million. They moved towards the door, a pathetic attempt to reclaim control, to make it seem like they were rejecting us and not the other way around. Elijah, seeing his parents' bravado, started to rally. He grabbed Tamika's arm. "Come on, Tamika. We'll fight this. We'll sue them. We don't need them." "Oh, but I'm afraid you do, Mr. Preston." James's voice, smooth as glass, stopped them. They paused, their hands inches from the brass doorknob. "Excuse me?" Charles sneered, turning slowly. "I said," James repeated, "I'm afraid you do need them. Or rather, you needed her money. Please, sit back down. We're not quite finished with the presentation." "We have nothing more to discuss," Charles snarled. "On the contrary," James replied, pressing a button on the small remote in his hand. The large projection screen that was recessed into the ceiling hummed, gliding silently down. "You all came here today under the pretense of caring for Catherine and David. We're simply trying to understand the full depth of that concern." The screen lit up, displaying a document titled, in large, bold letters, "Liability Report. Coleman, Tamika, and Elijah." Tamika and Elijah froze. "What is this?" Tamika demanded, her voice rising in panic. You have no right. That's private." "It was private," James corrected her, "until you made it the trust's business by attempting to defraud it. As trustee, I have a fiduciary duty to protect the trust from all credible threats. And you, Mrs. Coleman, along with your accomplices, became the most significant threat of all." He aimed the red dot of a laser pointer at the screen. "You see, we were deeply curious as to why you were so desperate. Why try to have your mother committed? Why risk everything for this $500,000 house? The 36 million was the obvious prize, but the house, that was a smaller, more desperate move. It implied a severe cash flow problem." James clicked the remote. A long list of credit card accounts filled the screen. American Express Platinum, Chase Sapphire Reserve, Visa Black, 23 different cards in total. "You two," James said, addressing Tamika and Elijah directly, "are living a spectacular lie. Your combined income before taxes is approximately $160,000 a year." "That's none of your business," Elijah snapped, his face pale. "It is now," James said, "because your combined spending, according to these statements from the past 12 months, was just over $315,000, a shortfall of $155,000. But of course, it gets much worse." He clicked again. A new slide showed personal loans, payday advances, and applications for a second mortgage on their condo. "All tallied," James said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Your current unsecured, high-interest debt totals $764,112.90. "What?" The voice wasn't Tamika's. It was Elijah's. He turned to his wife, his face bone-white with a dawning, nauseating horror. $700,000, he whispered, his voice almost inaudible. Tamika couldn't look at him. She was staring at the screen, at the numbers that represented her total ruin, all laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights. You told me it was 200, he cried, his voice cracking. "You told me it was one bad business loan. You lied to me." Tamika finally looked at him, her face crumbling. I was going to fix it. I just needed one big score. I thought—" "You thought what?" Elijah screamed, tears of rage now streaming down his face. "You thought you'd steal my mother-in-law's house to pay for your... What is this?" "This," James said helpfully, clicking to the next slide, "is a detailed transaction history from 6 different offshore sports betting websites. It appears, Mrs. Coleman, that the vast majority of this debt isn't from buying your husband expensive handbags. It's from gambling. You've gambled away almost $500,000 that you never had." Elijah looked like he was going to be sick. He shuffled away from Tamika as if she were contaminated. Charles Preston, however, looked almost relieved. He saw an opportunity to distance himself. "A gambler," he said, his voice dripping with theatrical disgust. "My God, Bernice, can you believe it? This grifter married our son. She's deceived all of us." Bernice nodded along, clutching at her pearls. She was going to drag our poor Elijah down with her. The liar. "Oh, but that's not entirely true, is it?" James said, his voice dangerously soft. Charles and Bernice froze. "What do you mean?" Charles demanded. James clicked the remote. The screen changed. It now read, "Preston, Charles, and Bernice, financial inquiry." "What is this?" Bernice sputtered, her fake outrage vanishing. "You have no right to our finances." "Again, I do," James said. "The moment you signed that document as a witness to a fraudulent act, you legally became a co-conspirator. I had to know why a supposedly wealthy man like you, Charles, would risk his entire reputation on such a flimsy, illegal scheme. Unless, of course, you were just as desperate as your daughter-in-law." The screen lit up with new data. "It appears your boutique hedge fund, Mr. Preston, isn't doing so well. In fact, it's been under active investigation by the SEC for severe capital irregularities for the past 6 months." Charles Preston stopped breathing. "My investigators discovered that you've been borrowing heavily from your clients' trust accounts to cover your own catastrophic market losses," James said. "You're not just broke, Charles. You're insolvent, and you're about to be indicted." "You monster!" Bernice shrieked, turning on her husband. "You told me the business was fine. You said you were a genius." "And you?" Charles roared back, his face purple. "You told me your mother gave you that money. That's a lie." "Oh, is it?" James said, clicking one last time. "And you, Bernice, that generous helping hand you gave your son, the money for his Maserati, the down payment on the condo that didn't come from your husband's successful business. We traced the transactions. You have been systematically draining your own 89-year-old mother's retirement account without her knowledge, an account, I might add, that she held with our bank." "You common thief!" Charles howled at his wife. "You're one to talk, you fraud." It all fell apart right there. The screaming, the accusations, the raw, ugly truth of their lives exploding in the middle of James's conference room. It was beautiful. James Patterson let them implode for a full minute, a symphony of destruction. Then he cleared his throat. "It appears," he said, turning off the screen, plunging the room back into a heavy silence, "that you weren't a healthy family trying to help an old lady. You were a collapsing house of cards, and you were all trying to use Catherine and David as your foundation. This meeting is over." The heavy silence in the room stretched for 10 full seconds. It was broken by Elijah. He hadn't passed out. He had been calculating. He slowly, very slowly, got to his feet, his face pale, his eyes fixed on my daughter Tamika. "You," he whispered. His voice was no longer sweet or faked. It was a low, reptilian hiss. You lying, worthless fraud." Tamika, who was still staring at the blank screen where her $36 million had just vanished, flinched. "What, Elijah? I didn't lie. I thought—" "You thought?" he shrieked, his voice suddenly rising to a hysterical register that made everyone wince. "You thought? You told me your family was old money. You told me your mother was modest and eccentric. You told me this house was just the beginning." I was trying to give you what you wanted," Tamika cried back, her desperation finally finding an outlet in anger. "I was trying to keep up. Who was the one who needed the Maserati? Who had to have the condo in the city? Who spent $11,000 on a single purse last week?" "Because you told me we could afford it," he screamed, taking a step toward her, his hands balled into fists. "I was trying to make it work. I was managing." "Managing?" Bernice Preston, who had recovered from her own shock, stood up. Her voice was full of venom. "You call $760,000 in gambling debt managing? You're a degenerate, Tamika. You married our son under false pretenses. You're a common grifter." "Oh, I'm the grifter?" Tamika laughed, a high, broken, terrible sound. "Your husband is a crook. He's about to be indicted by the SEC. And you?" She pointed a finger at Bernice. "You stole from your own 89-year-old mother. You're a bunch of hypocrites, a family of vampires." Charles Preston let out a roar and lunged across the table. "You ungrateful—" "Gentlemen," James Patterson's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos like a whip. He placed himself between Charles and Tamika. "That's enough." The room fell silent again, the air vibrating with raw hatred. "This," James said, gesturing to all four of them with utter disgust, "is a place of business. It is my office. You will not turn it into whatever this is. The meeting, as I said before, is over. The trust is secure. The documents are signed. Now I must insist that you take your family disputes elsewhere, immediately." Elijah wasn't looking at his parents. He wasn't looking at James. He was just staring at Tamika, and I could see the final cold calculations clicking into place behind his eyes. This wasn't just anger anymore. It was grief, but he wasn't grieving for the man. He was grieving for the money. "So that's it," Tamika whispered, her voice hollow. She saw it too. It was always just the money. Elijah, busy grabbing his expensive briefcase, ignored her. "You never loved me," Tamika said, a little louder. "You loved this." She gestured around the opulent office. "You loved the idea of it, of the 36 million. Elijah finally paused. He turned to face her. His face was cold, composed, and stripped of all emotion. All the fake love, all the honeyed words. "Well, she was rich," he said, his voice flat. "And you? You were too stupid to even inherit properly. You couldn't even do that one simple thing, right? That was the bullet. I watched my daughter take it. I saw the last spark of the weak, desperate girl who tried so hard to please him just die." She straightened up. She looked at him, really looked at him, as if for the first time. "You're a monster," she whispered. Elijah just laughed, a short, ugly, humorless bark. "No, Tamika, I'm just practical. And you? You turned out to be a very, very bad investment." He turned to his parents. "Let's go. I need a drink. I need to call my lawyer." "Wait," Tamika said. He turned, his face a mask of irritation. "What now? Are you going to beg? It won't work." Tamika slowly, deliberately, held up her left hand. "You forgot this." She twisted the simple gold wedding band from her finger. "It was my own father's ring, the one I gave her when she told me she was getting married." She looked at it, then threw it on the polished floor. It skittered across the mahogany and came to a stop right at the toe of his designer shoes. "I'm divorcing you," she said. Elijah looked at the ring. Then he looked back at her. He laughed again, that same awful, brittle laugh. "Divorce me? You can't afford to divorce me, you fool. I'll take—" He paused. The awful, final realization hit him. There's nothing to take." "Exactly," I said from my chair. Elijah's face contorted. The last of his composure shattered into pure, unadulterated fury. He ripped the massive, glittering diamond ring, the one she had bought him with a fraudulent loan, from his own finger. "Fine!" he screamed. "You want it? Take it!" He didn't throw it on the floor. He threw it right at her face. Tamika ducked, and the ring, worth a fortune she never had, pinged off the glass conference room wall behind her with a sharp crack. "I'd rather go home and live with my criminal parents," he spat, his voice thick with poison, "than spend one more second breathing the same air as a pathetic, broke failure like you." He grabbed Bernice's arm. "Come on, I'm calling my lawyer. I want an annulment." Bernice, looking completely defeated and 10 years older, let her son pull her from the room. Charles Preston was the last to leave. He didn't look at his wife or his son. He paused at the door, turned, and looked directly at me. His eyes were cold, dead, and filled with an almost tangible hatred. "You," he growled, his voice low. "You enjoyed this. You planned all of this humiliation." "No, Charles," I said, meeting his gaze. "I didn't. I just lived my life quietly. You planned. You schemed. You were the arrogant ones. I just had a better exit strategy." He stared at me for a long, terrible moment. The promise of future battles hung in the air between us. Then he turned and followed his family out of the office, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place echoed in the sudden, profound silence. The heavy glass door clicked shut, and the room plunged into a sudden, dense silence. The echoes of Elijah's screaming and Charles's threats seemed to be sucked out of the room, leaving a heavy vacuum. They were all gone. The Prestons with their fake wealth and real cruelty. Elijah with his venom and his ambition. They had vanished like a bad dream. The only one left was Tamika. She hadn't left. She couldn't. She was a crumpled heap on the floor by the conference room door, a 39-year-old woman in a wrinkled power suit sobbing into her hands. This was a woman who had just lost her husband, her in-laws, her house, and a $36 million fortune, all in the space of 15 minutes. She was completely, totally, and finally alone. David let out a long, shaky breath and sank heavily into his chair. Anthony, my nephew, moved silently to stand behind him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. James Patterson, my lawyer, showed no emotion. He walked calmly back to the head of the table. He picked up the signed 10-page care and property transfer agreement, the confession, and tapped it neatly against the tabletop. He placed it carefully into a new unmarked folder. Tamika didn't move. She just knelt on the expensive carpet, her shoulders shaking with those awful, gasping, choked-off sobs. They were the sounds of a child who finally understands, far too late, that they are in terrible, irreversible trouble. I wanted to feel something, pity, anger, anything. But I felt empty. I felt a vast, aching sadness for the little girl I raised and the woman she had failed to become. I let her cry for a long, heavy minute. She needed to feel the absolute bottom of the pit she had dug for herself. Finally, James cleared his throat. Mrs. Coleman. Tamika flinched at the formal name. She slowly, painfully, pushed herself up from the floor. Her face was a wreck, red and swollen, her suit stained with her own tears. She looked at James, her eyes wild with terror. "Please," Tamika whispered. Her voice was raw. Just let me go. I'll leave. I'll go to a motel. I won't bother you anymore. I have nothing. It's over." James Patterson looked at her, his face unreadable. "You're mistaken, Mrs. Coleman. You still have a great many things." Tamika looked confused. "What?" "You have criminal liabilities," James stated. Tamika's head snapped up. "What? What are you talking about? It's over. It's done. It's a family thing, an inheritance thing. You won. You got everything." "This was never a meeting about inheritance, Tamika," James said, his voice dropping, becoming the sharp clinical voice of a prosecutor. "This was a meeting to finalize the evidence against you. You seem to be under the impression that this ends here. It doesn't. It ends in a courtroom. Evidence. For what? For what?" James picked up a fresh yellow legal pad from his briefcase and clicked his pen. "Let's list them, shall we?" "1," he said, "conspiracy to commit elder fraud, a felony. You, your husband, and your in-laws conspired to deprive your parents of their legal property by making fraudulent claims of mental incompetence." He held up the stack of papers they had all just signed, a charge to which you have all very helpfully just confessed in writing, with witnesses. Tamika started shaking, a visible tremor that began in her hands. "No, we just thought—" "2," James went on, writing on the pad. "Attempted bank and wire fraud, a federal crime. 3 months ago, you and Charles Preston personally petitioned the First National Trust Bank to gain control of the Coleman Trust's assets by making false claims about your mother's mental state. The bank's security footage is excellent. The manager's testimony is even better." I was just worried about her," Tamika pleaded. 3, James continued, ignoring her. "Forgery, attempting to access bank funds using what you believe to be your mother's authority. And finally, my personal favorite, felony elder abuse. You intentionally and systematically inflicted profound emotional and mental distress on your parents, both citizens over the age of 65, for the explicit purpose of financial gain. In this state, that carries a mandatory minimum prison sentence." The word hung in the air. Prison. Tamika's face went from pale to a sickly greenish white. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked like she was going to vomit. "Jail," she whispered, her voice cracking. You're talking about jail?" "I'm talking about prison, Tamika," James said, his voice like ice. "Men like Charles Preston, white-collar criminals, they get prison. But women like you, who gamble away $750,000 and then try to defraud their elderly parents to cover it up? Judges are not kind to women like you." Tamika's legs gave out, and she collapsed into the nearest chair. She didn't look at James. She didn't look at David. She turned her wide, terrified, pleading eyes to me. "Mom," she gasped. "Mom, please, you wouldn't." She stumbled out of the chair and fell to her knees in front of me. She grabbed at the legs of my new suit. "Mom, please, you wouldn't send your daughter to prison. You wouldn't do that. It was Elijah. It was his parents. They put these ideas in my head. They told me it was normal. I was desperate. I love you, Mom. I've always loved you. Please, don't do this." I looked down at the 39-year-old woman, sobbing at my feet. "You love me," I repeated. The words felt like gravel in my mouth. "You tried to have me declared insane and locked away in a home, Tamika. Is that what love looks like to you? You stood in my kitchen, in my house, and told me I should just accept being moved into the basement." "I didn't," she sobbed. "I was scared. You were greedy," I said. "And now you're pathetic. You asked me if I would send my daughter to prison. Let me ask you, would a daughter try to send her mother to a madhouse? You already have my answer. You gave it to me yourself last night." I looked up at James. "James, is there a way for her to avoid this?" Tamika looked up, her face streaked with tears, a new, desperate hope flooding her eyes. "Yes," James said. "As I told Mrs. Coleman before this meeting, she is conditionally merciful. She is willing to instruct my office not to forward this beautiful, airtight file to the district attorney's office." "Anything," Tamika cried, still on her knees. "I'll do anything, Mom. I swear, anything." "Under one," James said. "Very specific set of conditions. They are absolute. They are non-negotiable. Do you understand?" Tamika nodded frantically. "Yes, just tell me." "1," James said. "You will sign the full, detailed confession of your actions, which my team has already prepared based on the document you signed earlier. 2, you will sign the divorce papers we are drafting right now, citing irreconcilable differences and waiving all claims to any community property, present or future. 3, you will agree to a permanent 500-yard restraining order against Elijah Preston and his parents. We must ensure you are never under their toxic influence again." Yes, I'll do it," Tamika said, nodding, grabbing at the chance. "Is that it? I'll sign everything. I'll do it right now." "And 4, James said, his voice dropping. "The most important condition. The one Mrs. Coleman, your mother, designed herself." Tamika was still on her knees, staring up at James, waiting for the final blow. She was a cornered animal, ready for anything. But before James could speak, David held up a hand. "Wait, James, just wait." He had been silent, a ghost in the room, absorbing every horrific revelation. Now he rose from his chair. He walked past me, past Anthony, and stood over his daughter. I expected to see his usual gentleness. I expected tears. But his face was hard. It was the face of a father who had been betrayed to his very soul. "Before we talk about conditions," he said, his voice shaky but clear, "I need to know one thing." Tamika looked up at him, her face a mess. "Dad, anything." "Why?" he asked. It was the simplest question in the world and the most complicated. "Just why? We loved you, Tamika. We gave you everything. We worked so hard. Your mother, she built this legacy, this secret to protect you, and you tried to destroy her. You looked at us, your own parents, and you saw what? A burden? An obstacle? What did we do? What did I do to make you hate us so much?" This question was more devastating than any legal threat. It was her father asking her how she became a monster. Tamika couldn't answer. She just broke down. She buried her face in her hands, and her sobs echoed in the expensive, silent room. "I don't hate you," she choked out, her voice muffled. "I don't. You just what?" David demanded. "What was more important than us?" She looked up, and the truth, the ugly, pathetic truth, finally came pouring out of her. "I was ashamed," she screamed, the words tearing from her throat. "I was always ashamed." I frowned. "Ashamed? Ashamed of what?" "We gave you a good home. We gave you an education. You don't get it," she cried, looking at me. "You never got it. I grew up in that simple house, that humble house. I went to state college while all my friends went to Yale and Harvard. You were an architect, Mom, but you drove a 10-year-old Honda and patched your own roof. Dad, you were a teacher, but you clipped coupons and shopped at discount stores. You called it being frugal. You called it valuing labor. She laughed, that terrible, broken laugh again. You know what they called it, my friends? They called it being poor. They called it being cheap. So you were ashamed of us? I said. It wasn't a question. And then she went on, ignoring me. I met Elijah and his family, Charles, Bernice. They had things. They didn't just have money, they had class. They talked about summers in the Hamptons, skiing in Gstaad, clubs I didn't even know existed. They were better. They're criminals, Anthony said, speaking for the first time. I didn't know that then, Tamika screamed at him. I just knew they were everything I wasn't. I wanted to be one of them. I wanted Elijah, and to have him I had to lie. I told him you were from old money. I told him you were eccentric and that you were modest by choice, but that you were secretly wealthy. She looked at me, a bitter irony in her eyes. Turns out I wasn't even lying, was I? You were wealthy. You just never told me. The lie just got bigger. She went on, her voice dropping to a whisper. I had to buy the ring for him. I took out a loan. I had to take him on vacations we couldn't afford. I took out another loan. Then I had to keep up. The condo, the car, the dinners, and the betting. I thought I could make one big score, just one, pay it all off, live the life I was pretending to have. But you didn't win, I said. I never won, she whispered. I just lost and lost and lost. So you came for us, David said, his voice flat. When your lies ran out, you came for us. Tamika nodded, her shoulders slumping in total defeat. Elijah's parents were coming to town. They wanted to see the estate. They wanted to meet the eccentric parents. I was trapped. I knew the minute they saw the house, the minute they met you. The game was up. They'd see you for what you were. Simple. And you couldn't have that, I said. No, I couldn't. So the plan to have me declared incompetent, that was Charles's idea, she said, grabbing at the excuse. He said it was a standard move for high net worth people, that it was estate planning to protect the assets from erratic decisions. I went along with it. I thought if I could get control of the money, I could fix everything before you even knew it was gone. And when that failed, I pressed, what was the plan last night, Tamika? She wouldn't look at me. She looked at the floor. Tell me. It was desperation, she mumbled. Elijah and his parents, they said we had to take control, that you were in the way, a burden. They said if we moved in, took charge, showed you that we were the ones in control, you'd just give up. Give up? David repeated, horrified. You were trying to break our spirit. We were going to sell the house, she admitted. Use the money to pay off the immediate debts. Move you and Mom into a nice facility, a high-end one. We thought you'd be happier there, with people your own age. A facility? I said. You were going to sell our house, the house I built, and use the money to pay off your gambling debts, all while locking us away in a nursing home? She stammered. You were ashamed of us, Tamika, I said, the final cold truth settling over us. You were ashamed of our simple life, so you decided to steal it, sell it for parts, and throw us away, all to impress a family of thieves and frauds. She had no answer. She just knelt there, the ugly, pathetic truth of her life laid bare. She was a weak woman, a gambler, and a liar who tried to destroy her own parents out of shame. Tamika's confession hung in the air, thick and toxic. She was still kneeling on the floor, a broken 39-year-old woman who had just admitted to throwing her entire life away because she was ashamed of us. She was ashamed of our love. David, who had been standing over her, stiff with a father's pain, slowly raised his right hand. I saw it coming, but I did nothing to stop it. The sound of his palm connecting with her cheek echoed in the high-ceilinged room. It was not a gentle touch. It was a hard, sharp slap that snapped Tamika's head to the side. That, he said, his voice trembling with a fury I had never heard from him in 46 years, is for making me cry. It's for the terror you put us through. It's for standing in my kitchen and planning to throw your mother and me in the basement." Tamika didn't even flinch. She just knelt there, her head bowed, the red mark blooming on her cheek. I thought that was it. I thought that was his final judgment. But then he did something that broke my own resolve. He let out a great, shuddering sob, and he sank to the floor in front of her. He pulled her head to his chest and wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she wept. "And this," he cried, his tears falling into her hair, this is because you're still my little girl. You're my daughter, and you are a fool, a terrible, terrible fool. But you're still my little girl." Tamika's composure, the last of her pathetic defenses, shattered completely. She howled. It was a sound of pure, bottomless grief. She clung to her father, her face buried in his shoulder, and they knelt there together, two halves of a broken heart, crying for the family she had just destroyed. Anthony turned his back, walking over to the window to give them a moment of privacy. James looked at me, his face unreadable, but his eyes said, "And now, Catherine?" I let them cry for a full minute. I let the poison out. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the consequences. I walked over to them. "David," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "That's enough." I placed my hand on his shoulder. He looked up at me, his face a mask of tears. "James, Anthony," I said, "please give us a moment, my husband, my daughter, and me." James nodded. He and Anthony left quickly and quietly from the conference room, closing the heavy door behind them, leaving the three of us alone. I looked down at Tamika, who was still kneeling, and at David, who was sitting on the floor beside her. "Get up, Tamika," I ordered. She sniffled, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her expensive wrinkled suit. She looked like a disobedient child. "Mom, Get up." She slowly, painfully got to her feet. She stood before me, head bowed, shoulders slumped. "You have two paths," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I need you to listen very carefully. James and I have prepared a file. It contains the bank records, the bank manager's testimony, the audio recordings of your Plan B conversation, and the signed confession you and your criminal in-laws just gave us. It is enough to send you, Elijah, and his parents to prison for a very long time. That is Path A. You, me, and your father never speak again." Tamika's eyes widened in sheer terror. "Mom, no! You said there were conditions." "I did," I replied. "And that is Path B. You will avoid prison, Tamika. You will not face criminal charges from me, but you will pay for what you have done. You will pay in a way that you will finally understand. And these conditions, they are non-negotiable. You will agree to all of them right here, right now, or I will call James back in and he will walk that file straight over to the district attorney's office. Am I clear?" "Yes, Mom, clear," she said, nodding frantically, her eyes desperate. "Anything, I'll do anything." "Good." I began to pace. 1, you will go to treatment, not just therapy. You are a gambler. You have an addiction. You will check yourself into a 30-day inpatient program, and you will follow it with outpatient meetings for as long as the doctor deems necessary. Am I clear? "Yes, Mom." 2, you will get a job. I don't care what it is. You can sweep floors. You can flip burgers. You can drive a truck. You will earn a wage with your hands. And with that wage, you will begin to pay back the $760,000 you owe, not to me, to the trust. You will pay it back with interest. You will not receive a single penny from me or your father or the trust. Your inheritance is gone forever. Am I clear? She swallowed hard. The reality of a lifetime of debt, of manual labor, was hitting her. But she looked at me, at the prison door waiting on the other side, and she nodded. "Yes, I understand. I'll do it." 3, the Prestons, Elijah, his entire family. You are done with them. James is drafting the divorce papers as we speak. You will sign them. You will file a permanent 500-yard restraining order against all 3 of them. You will never see them, speak to them, or contact them in any way for the rest of your life. They are poison, Tamika. They poisoned you, and you let them. That ends today. Am I clear? She didn't hesitate. "Yes, clear. It's over. I know." Good, I said. I stopped pacing and stood in front of her. And 4, you will take your punishment. Tamika looked at me, her eyes filled with fear. Punishment? I thought, the job? The debt? That's not punishment, honey. That's just being a responsible adult. That's just cleaning up your own mess. No, I mean a real punishment. A consequence. A daily reminder of what you did, of who you were willing to become. What? What is it? She whispered. I let the silence hang for a moment. I looked at David. He nodded at me, his face still tear-streaked, but his eyes were firm. He was with me. You're going to come home, I said. Tamika's face flooded with a relief so profound she almost collapsed. Home? Oh, Mom, thank you, thank you. Don't thank me yet, I cut her off. You're not coming home as our daughter. You're coming home as our tenant. Anthony is the new property owner. He'll be your landlord. I can pay rent, she stammered, with my new job. Oh, you'll pay rent, I said. But not in cash. You'll pay it in sweat. You're going to live in the basement. Her face froze. The basement? The guest room? The one downstairs? The one you and your husband so generously selected for me and your father? That will be your new home. It's comfortable. It's convenient. It's near the laundry room. And as you so helpfully pointed out, a person doesn't need that much space. You will live there. And in exchange for rent, you will be the property's resident caretaker. You will fix the roof, Tamika. You will unclog the drains. You will paint the fences. You will cut the grass. You will learn with your own 2 hands what it takes to maintain the very house you were so ready to steal and sell. You will do this every single day until you have paid your debt, not just to the trust, but to this family. Do you accept these conditions? She stared at me, the full weight of her humiliation, her fall from grace, crashing down on her. She had gone from a $36 million heiress to a broke, divorced gambler sentenced to live in her parents' basement as the handyman. It was, as I intended, a fate worse than prison. It was poetic justice. She looked at her father. She looked at me, and she gave a single, slow, defeated nod. Yes, Mom, she whispered, her voice broken. I accept. 1 month later, the house at 125 Peachtree Lane was no longer the same. It was lighter. The oppressive, suffocating tension that had defined our lives for the last few years was gone, replaced by something I hadn't realized I missed, the sounds of a normal, happy home. Anthony and his husband, Kevin, a kind, steady man who worked as a high school history teacher, had moved in 2 weeks after that day in James's office. They took the 2 guest rooms upstairs, turning one into a nursery. As it turned out, Anthony and Kevin were expecting their first child. They used a surrogate, a fact Anthony had been afraid to share amidst the family chaos. The moment David found out, he transformed. The haunted, betrayed man who walked out of James's office vanished, and the grandfather he always wanted to be returned. His grief over Tamika's betrayal was channeled into a new, fierce purpose, preparing for his grandnephew. The house, which had been silent for so long, was now filled with the sounds of David and Anthony laughing in the kitchen, arguing over paint swatches for the nursery. David insisted on baby blue, Anthony wanted a sophisticated gray. And baking. God, I had missed the smell of David's baking. He hadn't baked for pleasure in years. Now, the house constantly smelled of cinnamon, vanilla, and apple pie. David and I were back in our master bedroom, our sanctuary. Life was settling into a new rhythm, a better one. Anthony and Kevin insisted on paying for groceries, though they didn't have to. Kevin, as it happened, was a fantastic gardener and spent his weekends reclaiming my backyard from the weeds with a dedication I hadn't seen in years. We were a family, a different one than I had planned, but a real one, forged in fire. And there was Tamika. Tamika lived in the basement. She got back from the 30-day inpatient gambling addiction program last week. She looked thin, thinner than I had ever seen her. The arrogance that had defined her for so long was gone, stripped away, leaving behind a quiet, hollow-eyed woman I barely recognized. She had kept her word, signed all the papers, the divorce, the restraining order, the confession. She got a job. She was stocking shelves and mixing paint at the local hardware store. Every evening, at 6:15 p.m. on the dot, I would hear the side door open and close. I'd watch from the kitchen window as my daughter, my 39-year-old daughter, walked across the backyard to the basement entrance. She was no longer the woman in the sleek navy blue power suit. She came home covered in a fine layer of drywall dust, her hair matted with sweat, her fingernails permanently stained with grease and paint. She looked exhausted. She looked broken. But for the first time in a very long time, she also looked real. She didn't join us for dinner. That was part of the deal. Her meals were her own responsibility. She ate alone in her basement room. She was a tenant, a caretaker. She was serving a sentence. I didn't speak to her, and she didn't speak to me. We coexisted in the same house, two separate worlds. Sometimes David would look at me across the dinner table, his eyes pleading, asking me to say something, to offer some small comfort. But I held firm. This was not a wound that could be healed with a simple, "I'm sorry." It was a debt that had to be paid in full, with sweat and humility and time. Tonight, I was in the kitchen while David and Anthony were upstairs. I was getting myself a glass of water when I heard it. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was coming from the kitchen sink. A steady, annoying, persistent leak from the faucet I'd installed myself 16 years ago. I sighed. I looked at the drip. Then I looked at the clock. 6:13 p.m. I waited. At 6:15 on the dot, I heard the side door. I watched Tamika walk past the window, head down, shoulders slumped, carrying her lunchbox. I dried my hands and went to the basement door. I opened it and walked down the stairs. The room was clean, sparse, a neatly made single bed, a small desk, a hot plate in the corner. Tamika was in the middle of the room, taking off her heavy, paint-splattered work boots. She froze when she saw me. She looked like a startled animal. "Mom," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "The faucet," I said, my voice flat, all business. "The one in the kitchen. It's leaking. A washer's probably worn out. I need you to fix it." Tamika just looked at me for a second. A flash of the old, arrogant Tamika sparked in her eyes, the marketing director who didn't fix things, the woman who hired people. I met her gaze without blinking, and the spark died as quickly as it appeared. She looked down at her own dirty, calloused hands. "Okay," she said quietly. I'll need to go back to the store tomorrow, get a new set of O-rings for that model." "Right," I said. "See that you do. Anthony needs the kitchen for dinner." I turned to leave. I was halfway up the stairs when I stopped. I didn't turn around. "Your father," I said, my back still to her, my hand on the railing. "He made that chicken cacciatore you like. There's a plate of it saved for you on the stove." I heard a sharp intake of breath from the room below. I waited. I heard a sound, a small, choked noise like a sob being held back. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was thick. "Please tell him thank you." I stood there for another moment, my hand on the railing. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I wasn't even close. But I knew what I was seeing. I was seeing the beginning of the payment. "You're paying your rent, Tamika," I said, still not looking at her. "You're getting your hands dirty. You're doing it on your own." I paused, and the final words came out, heavy with the weight of everything we had lost and everything that was still broken. "For the first time in your life, you're doing it on your own." I walked up the rest of the stairs and closed the door, leaving her alone in the basement with her tools and the dinner her father saved for her. The phone rang 2 weeks later. It was James. His voice was crisp, efficient, and held a note of finality. "Catherine," he said, "I wanted to give you the final update on the Preston side of things. It's officially over." I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. Outside the window, I could see David and Anthony on the porch swing, talking excitedly about the baby that was on its way. "What happened, James?" I asked. "Charles Preston," James began, "was arrested by federal agents an hour ago at his golf club, right on the 9th hole." I closed my eyes. Justice. The SEC investigation we uncovered was the final nail. He was running a full-blown Ponzi scheme. He's facing 20 years minimum. He's not getting out. "And his wife, Bernice?" I asked. "Completely ruined," James replied, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. "Every account she had was tied to his fraudulent business. The house has been seized. The cars are gone. She's currently living in a Motel 6. She is functionally bankrupt," he added, and to top it off, she had the audacity to try and call my office, demanding that the Coleman Trust pay for her legal fees. "And the son?" I asked. I couldn't bring myself to say his name. "Ah, yes, Elijah. He filed for divorce immediately, but his lawyer dropped the case when we sent over Tamika's pay stubs from the hardware store. He didn't get a dime. He has no job, no skills, and his parents' credit cards are now useless." My investigator did one last follow-up. "He's already back on the market. He was spotted last night at a gala trying to chat up a 90-year-old oil baroness. He's hunting for his next victim." I shook my head, a small, bitter smile playing on my lips. "Some people never learn, James." "No, Catherine," he replied. "They don't. But we do, and Tamika is learning. That, I think, is what matters." His words hung in the air. "So," James asked, his voice softening, "all business concluded. It's the end. The Prestons are gone. Elijah is gone. Tamika is paying her dues. The last question is, are you happy, Catherine? After all of this, was it worth it?" I didn't answer right away. My gaze drifted back to the window. David and Anthony were still on the porch swing, laughing. In the yard, I could see Kevin, Anthony's husband, standing next to our old, stubborn lawnmower, and next to him was Tamika. She was covered in grease. Her hands were black. She had the engine cover of the mower open, and she and Kevin were peering inside. Kevin was pointing at something. Tamika was listening. She was nodding. She wasn't the sleek marketing director. She wasn't the arrogant, defeated daughter. She was just a woman learning how to fix something. She was learning how to do the work that I had always done. I watched as Tamika finally gave the pull cord a hard yank. The engine sputtered, choked, and then roared to life. She sat down on the seat, put it in gear, and slowly, carefully, she cut the first straight line in the grass. I turned back to the phone. "Happy is a complicated word, James," I said. "I'm not happy that my daughter is a broken woman. I'm not happy that I had to destroy her life to save it. But," James prompted gently. "But," I said, my voice catching. I look out my window and I see my husband smiling for the first time in years. I see my nephew, who is more of a son to me than my daughter ever was, safe and secure in my home. I hear laughter in this house again. I watch Tamika make another pass on the mower, her face set in concentration. "And I see a woman out there on the lawn," I finished. "A woman who might just be worth something one day. I'm not happy, James, but I'm at peace. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm getting there. I'm getting closer. Thanks to you. That's all I needed to hear, Catherine. Take care of that family." "I will," I said. "The real one." I hung up the phone. 6 months have passed since that day in James's office. 6 months since the old toxic order of my family shattered. The winter came and went, and now a cool spring evening was settling over the house. Sunday dinner at 125 Peachtree Lane used to be a performance, a tense, quiet affair where David and I tried to pretend, and Tamika and Elijah pretended right back, all of us choking on unspoken resentments and lies. But this was different. The table was set for 5. The air in the dining room wasn't heavy. It was light. It smelled of David's roast chicken and the lemon pound cake Anthony had made. Kevin, Anthony's husband, was telling a funny story about a student in his history class who tried to argue that the American Revolution was optional. David was laughing, a deep, real laugh I hadn't heard in years. He and Anthony were sitting close together. Anthony was 8 months pregnant, via surrogate, radiant and full of life, and David fussed over him constantly, his grief over Tamika's betrayal channeled into this new, fierce purpose. "I'm telling you, David, Gray is very sophisticated," Anthony was saying, pointing with his fork. "Nonsense," David countered, his eyes sparkling. "Gray is calming. We can add accents. Yellow duckies. It'll be beautiful. We don't want the baby to be overstimulated, do we?" They seemed happy. My husband, who had been a ghost in his own home, was alive again. He had a purpose. He was going to be a grandfather in every way but blood. And at the far end of the table, sitting in the chair Charles Preston once tried to claim, was Tamika. She was quiet. She ate her food, her eyes on her plate. She'd been living in the basement for 6 months, working at the hardware store for 5. She looked different. The arrogance that had defined her for so long was gone, stripped away, leaving behind a quiet, hollow-eyed woman. Her hands told the story. They were no longer the soft hands of a marketing director. They were rough. Her knuckles were calloused, her nails clean, but permanently stained at the edges. They were the hands of a woman who worked. She didn't have dinner with us every night, but Sunday was becoming a tradition. It was Anthony who had insisted. "She's part of the house, Aunt Catherine. She does the work. She should eat with the family." She listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't brag. She didn't pretend. She was just there. "Tamika," Kevin said, drawing her into the conversation. "That fix you did on the attic insulation. Brilliant. Our room is 10 degrees warmer." Tamika looked up, startled to be addressed. "Oh, it was just some new rock wool. The old stuff was compressed. I saw a draft near the north eaves." "Well, whatever it was," Anthony smiled at her, "it worked. Thank you." Tamika just nodded, a faint blush rising on her neck. "You're welcome." She went back to her chicken. She wasn't the center of attention. She wasn't the heir apparent. She was just the woman who lived in the basement, the woman who fixed things. And for the first time, it seemed like that was enough. After dinner, David and Anthony started clearing the dishes, arguing over who would get the last piece of cake. Kevin went upstairs to read. I did what I always do. I went out to the front porch. The air was cool, crisp, the scent of spring azaleas. I sat down in my old rocking chair, the one my own father built, and looked out at the quiet street. Peachtree Lane, 125. It was my home again. I heard the screen door creak open and shut behind me. It was Tamika. She stood awkwardly by the door for a moment, her hands twisting in the pockets of her clean jeans. She looked nervous. "Mom," she said. Her voice was quiet. "Tamika," I replied, not turning around. I just kept rocking. She came closer and stood in front of me, blocking my view of the street. She seemed smaller, not diminished, just human. Can I talk to you for a minute?" "I'm listening." She took a deep breath. Her rough hands trembled slightly as she pulled them from her pockets. In her right hand, she held 2 envelopes. They were plain, white business envelopes, slightly crumpled. This is the first one," she said, holding out the first envelope. It was thick. It's rent for the basement room. I'm 2 days late. I'm sorry. My paycheck didn't clear until this afternoon." I looked at her. I looked at the envelope. Her rent, as I had stipulated, was her labor, her work on the house. This was something else. "What is it?" I asked. "Anthony and Kevin. They're having a baby," she stammered, not meeting my eyes. "The work I do, it's fine for the house, but they need money for diapers, for things. It's my paycheck from the hardware store. All of it, from this month. It's $512. Please, just tell Anthony, it's for the baby." I took the envelope. $500. The woman who gambled away $500,000 was now handing over her entire hard-earned paycheck. "All right," I said, placing it on the small table beside me. "I'll give it to him." "And," she said, her voice dropping. She held out the second envelope. This one was thin. This is the other thing." I took it. It was lighter. "It's not much," she said, her voice full of a shame that was different than before. This wasn't the shame of being poor. This was the shame of being a debtor. It's $100. It's all I could save after rent. But it's the first." I frowned. "The first what?" "The first payment," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "For the $760,000. I know it's just a drop. I know it'll take forever, but it's a start. $100. I'll have another 100 next month. Maybe more if I get overtime." She stood there, exposed, offering this pathetic, powerful gesture. I held the small envelope in my hands, $100 against a $750,000 debt. It was nothing. It was a joke, and it was, at the same time, the most valuable payment I had ever seen. I looked at the envelope, then I looked up at my daughter. "You're right," I said, my voice catching. "It's not much. At this rate, it'll take you over 600 years to pay this off, Tamika." She flinched, but she didn't look away. She made no excuses. She just stood there and took the truth. "I know, ma'am," she whispered. I slowly, deliberately tucked the envelope with the $100 into my shirt pocket, right over my heart. "All right," I said, patting the pocket. "One payment down, a whole lot more to go." A single tear escaped her eye and rolled down her cheek. She angrily wiped it away with the back of her rough hand. "Yes, ma'am." She stood there for another moment. "The kitchen faucet. I fixed it. It won't drip anymore." "Good," I replied. "That's good work." She nodded as if she'd just been given the highest praise of her life. "Good night, Mom." "Good night, daughter." She turned and walked back toward the basement door, her shoulders straight. I sat on the porch for a long time, rocking back and forth in my father's chair. I listened to the faint sounds of David and Anthony laughing as they did the dishes. I heard the distant hum of the city. I felt the cool spring air on my face. James had asked me if I was happy. No, I wasn't happy. Happy was too simple a word. I lost my daughter, the brilliant, arrogant, weak, lying marketing director. That daughter was gone forever. I was forced to destroy her. But as I sat there in the dark, my hand resting on my chest, feeling the small, crumpled envelope in my pocket, I realized that in the wreckage I had found something else. I had found a woman who was paying her debts, a woman who fixed what was broken, a woman who was learning the hard way how to build a life instead of just buying one. I lost the daughter I thought I wanted, but I had finally found the woman I always needed her to be. I closed my eyes. The house was quiet. The war was over, and for the first time in my 68 years, my world was finally, truly in order. I was at peace. Here's the lesson we can all take away from this story. This story teaches us a powerful lesson about the difference between price and value. Tamika and the Prestons were obsessed with the price of everything, the house, the cars, the status. But they didn't understand the value of anything. They mistook Catherine's humility for weakness and her simplicity for poverty. But the real wealth isn't about what you can show off. It's about the character you build in private, the integrity you maintain under pressure, and the peace you find in an honest life. Respect, loyalty, and dignity are the only assets that can never be faked, forfeited, or gambled away. What did you think of Tamika's path to redemption? And who do you think was the true villain in this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, please remember to like and subscribe.